This video is owned and produced by Hello Kinetic, a channel to practice listening and reading English every day. Learn English through real books. Expand your vocabulary and be good at English. Chapter 11. In the morning I shaved again and dressed and drove downtown in the usual way and parked in the usual place, and if the parking lot attendant happened to know that I was an important public character, he did a top job in hiding it. I went upstairs and along the corridor and got keys out to unlock my door. A dark, smooth-looking guy watched me. "You Marlowe?" "So?" "Stick around," he said. "A guy wants to see you." He unplastered his back from the wall and strolled off languidly. I stepped inside the office and picked up the mail. There was more of it on the desk where the night cleaning woman had put it. I slit the envelopes after I opened windows, and threw away what I didn't want, which was practically all of it. I switched on the buzzer to the other door and filled a pipe and lit it, and then just sat there waiting for somebody to scream for help. I thought about Terry Lennox in a detached sort of way. He was already receding into the distance, white hair and scarred face and weak charm and his peculiar brand of pride. I didn't judge him or analyze him, just as I had never asked him questions about how he got wounded or how he ever happened to get himself married to anyone like Sylvia. He was like somebody you meet on board ship and get to know very well and never really know at all. He was gone like the same fellow when he says goodbye at the pier and "let's keep in touch, old man," and you know you won't and he won't. Likely enough you'll never even see the guy again. If you do, he will be an entirely different person, just another Rotarian in a club car. "How's business?" "Oh, not too bad." "You look good." "So do you." "I've put on too much weight." "Don't we all?" "Remember that trip in the Franconia, or whatever it was?" "Oh sure, swell trip, wasn't it?" "The hell, it was a swell trip." "You were bored stiff. You only talked to the guy because there wasn't anybody around that interested you." "Maybe it was like that with Terry Lennox and me." "No, not quite. I owned a piece of him. I had invested time and money in him, and 3 days in the ice house, not to mention a slug on the jaw and a punch in the neck that I felt every time I swallowed. Now he was dead and I couldn't even give him back his $500. That made me sore. It is always the little things that make you sore. The door buzzer and the telephone rang at the same time. I answered the phone first because the buzzer meant only that somebody had walked into my pint-sized waiting room. "Is this Mr. Marlowe?" "Mr. Endicott is calling you." "One moment please." He came on the line. "This is Sewell Endicott," he said, as if he didn't know his goddamn secretary had already fed me his name. "Good morning, Mr. Endicott. Glad to hear they turned you loose. I think possibly you had the right idea not to build any resistance." "It wasn't an idea. It was just mulishness. I doubt if you'll hear any more about it. But if you do and need help, let me hear from you." "Why would I? The man is dead. They'd have a hell of a time proving he ever came near me. Then they'd have to prove I had guilty knowledge. And then they'd have to prove he had committed a crime or was a fugitive." He cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "you haven't been told he left a full confession." "I was told, Mr. Endicott. I'm talking to a lawyer. Would I be out of line in suggesting that the confession would have to be proved too, both as to genuineness and as to veracity?" "I'm afraid I have no time for a legal discussion," he said sharply. "I'm flying to Mexico with a rather melancholy duty to perform. You can probably guess what it is?" "Aha. Depends who you're representing." "You didn't tell me, remember?" "I remember very well." "Well, goodbye, Marlowe. My offer of help is still good. But let me also offer you a little advice. Don't be too certain you're in the clear. You're in a pretty vulnerable business." He hung up. I put the phone back in its cradle carefully. I sat for a moment with my hand on it, scowling. Then I wiped the scowl off my face and got up to open the communicating door into my waiting room. A man was sitting by the window ruffling a magazine. He wore a bluish-gray suit with an almost invisible pale blue check. On his crossed feet were black moccasin-type ties, the kind with two eyelets that are almost as comfortable as strollers and don't wear your socks out every time you walk a block. His white handkerchief was folded square and the end of a pair of sunglasses showed behind it. He had thick dark wavy hair. He was tanned very dark. He looked up with bright eyes and smiled under a hairline mustache. His tie was a dark maroon tied in a pointed bow over a sparkling white shirt. He threw the magazine aside. "The crap these rags go for," he said. "I've been reading a piece about Costello." "Yeah, they know all about Costello. Like I know all about Helen of Troy. What can I do for you?" He looked me over unhurriedly. "Tarzan on a big red scooter," he said. "What? You? Marlowe? Tarzan on a big red scooter. They rough you up much?" "Here and there. What makes it your business?" "After Albright talked to Gregorius?" "No. Not after that." He nodded shortly. "You got a crust asking Albright to use ammunition on that slob." "I asked you what made it your business. Incidentally, I don't know Commissioner Albright and I didn't ask him to do anything. Why would he do anything for me?" He stared at me morosely. He stood up slowly, graceful as a panther. He walked across the room and looked into my office. He jerked his head at me and went in. He was a guy who owned the place where he happened to be. I went in after him and shut the door. He stood by the desk looking around, amused. "You're small time," he said. "Very small time." I went behind my desk and waited. "How much you make in a month, Marlowe?" I let it ride, and lit my pipe. "$7.50 would be tops," he said. I dropped a burnt match into a tray and puffed tobacco smoke. "You're a piker, Marlowe. You're a peanut grifter. You're so little it takes a magnifying glass to see you." I didn't say anything at all. "You got cheap emotions. You're cheap all over. You pal around with a guy, eat a few drinks, talk a few gags, slip him a little dough when he's strapped, and you're sold out to him. Just like some school kid that read Frank Merriwell. You got no guts, no brains, no connections, no savvy, so you throw out a phony attitude and expect people to cry over you. Tarzan on a big red scooter." He smiled a small weary smile. "In my book you're a nickel's worth of nothing." He leaned across the desk and flicked me across the face backhanded, casually and contemptuously, not meaning to hurt me, and the small smile stayed on his face. Then when I didn't even move for that he sat down slowly and leaned an elbow on the desk and cupped his brown chin in his brown hand. The bright eyes stared at me without anything in them but brightness. "Know who I am, cheapie? Your name's Menendez. The boys call you Mendy. You operate on the Strip." "Yeah. How did I get so big?" "I wouldn't know. You probably started out as a pimp in a Mexican whorehouse." He took a gold cigarette case out of his pocket and lit a brown cigarette with a gold lighter. He blew acrid smoke and nodded. He put the gold cigarette case on the desk and caressed it with his fingertips. "I'm a big bad man, Marlowe. I make lots of dough. I got to make lots of dough to juice the guys I got to juice in order to make lots of dough to juice the guys I got to juice. I got a place in Bel Air that cost 90 grand and I already spent more than that to fix it up. I got a lovely platinum blonde wife and 2 kids in private schools back east. My wife's got 150 grand in rocks and another 75 in furs and clothes. I got a butler, 2 maids, a cook, a chauffeur, not counting the monkey that walks behind me. Everywhere I go I'm a darling. The best of everything, the best food, the best drinks, the best hotel suites. I got a place in Florida and a seagoing yacht with a crew of 5 men. I got a Bentley, 2 Cadillacs, a Chrysler station wagon, and an MG for my boy. Couple of years my girl gets one too. What you got?" "Not much," I said. "This year I have a house to live in, all to myself." "No woman?" "Just me. In addition to that I have what you see here and $1,200 in the bank and a few thousand in bonds. That answer your question?" "What's the most you ever made on a single job?" $850. Jesus, how cheap can a guy get? Stop hamming and tell me what you want. He killed his cigarette half-smoked and immediately lit another. He leaned back in his chair. His lip curled at me. We were 3 guys in a foxhole eating, he said. It was cold as hell, snow all around. We eat out of cans. Cold food. A little shelling, more mortar fire. We are blue with the cold, and I mean blue, Randy Starr and me and this Terry Lennox. A mortar shell plops right in the middle of us and for some reason it don't go off. Those Jerrys have a lot of tricks. They got a twisted sense of humor. Sometimes you think it's a dud and 3 seconds later it ain't a dud. Terry grabs it and he's out of the foxhole before Randy and me can even start to get unstuck. But I mean quick, brother. Like a good ball handler. He throws himself face down and throws the thing away from him and it goes off in the air. Most of it goes over his head but a hunk gets the side of his face. Right then the Krauts mount an attack and the next thing we know we ain't there anymore. Menendez stopped talking and gave me the bright steady glare of his dark eyes. Thanks for telling me, I said. You take a good ribbing, Marlowe. You're okay. Randy and me talked things over and we decided that what happened to Terry Lennox was enough to screw up any guy's brains. For a long time we figured he was dead but he wasn't. The Krauts got him. They worked him over for about a year and a half. They did a good job but they hurt him too much. It cost us money to find out, and it cost us money to find him. But we made plenty in the black market after the war. We could afford it. All Terry gets out of saving our lives is half of a new face, white hair, and a bad case of nerves. Back east he hits the bottle, gets picked up here and there, kind of goes to pieces. There's something on his mind but we never know what. The next thing we know he's married to this rich dame and riding high. He unmarries her, hits bottom again, marries her again, and she gets dead. Randy and me can't do a thing for him. He won't let us except for that short job in Vegas. And when he gets in a real jam he don't come to us, he goes to a cheapie. Like you, a guy that cops can push around. So then he gets dead, and without telling us goodbye, and without giving us a chance to pay off. I could have got him out of the country faster than a card sharp can stack a deck. But he goes crying to you. It makes me sore. A cheapie, a guy cops can push around. The cops can push anybody around. What do you want me to do about it? Just lay off, Menendez said tightly. Lay off what? Trying to make yourself dough or publicity out of the Lennox case. It's finished, wrapped up. Terry's dead and we don't want him bothered anymore. The guy suffered too much. A hoodlum with sentiment, I said. That slays me. Watch your lip, cheapie. Watch your lip. Mendy Menendez don't argue with guys. He tells them. Find yourself another way to grab a buck. Get me? He stood up. The interview was finished. He picked up his gloves. They were snow-white pigskin. They didn't look as if he ever had them on. A dressy type, Mr. Menendez. But very tough behind it all. I'm not looking for publicity, I said. And nobody's offered me any dough. Why would they and for what? Don't kid me, Marlowe. You didn't spend 3 days in the freezer just because you're a sweetheart. You got paid off. I ain't saying who by but I got a notion. In the party I'm thinking about is plenty more of the stuff. The Lennox case is closed and it stays closed even if, he stopped dead and flipped his gloves at the desk edge. Even if Terry didn't kill her, I said. His surprise was as thin as the gold on a weekend wedding ring. I'd like to go along with you on that, cheapie. But it don't make any sense. But if it did make sense, and Terry wanted it the way it is, then that's how it stays. I didn't say anything. After a moment he grinned slowly. Tarzan on a big red scooter, he drawled. A tough guy. Lets me come in here and walk all over him. A guy that gets hired for nickels and dimes and gets pushed around by anybody. No dough, no family, no prospects, no nothing. See you around, cheapie. I sat still with my jaws clamped, staring at the glitter of his gold cigarette case on the desk corner. I felt old and tired. I got up slowly and reached for the case. "You forgot this," I said, going around the desk. "I got half a dozen of them," he sneered. When I was near enough to him, I held it out. His hand reached for it casually. "How about half a dozen of these?" I asked him and hit him as hard as I could in the middle of his belly. He doubled up, mewling. The cigarette case fell to the floor. He backed against the wall and his hands jerked back and forth convulsively. His breath fought to get into his lungs. He was sweating. Very slowly and with an intense effort he straightened up and we were eye to eye again. I reached out and ran a finger along the bone of his jaw. He held still for it. Finally he worked a smile onto his brown face. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said. "Next time bring a gun, or don't call me cheapy." "I got a guy to carry the gun." "Bring him with you. You'll need him. You're a hard guy to get sore, Marlowe." I moved the gold cigarette case to one side with my foot and bent and picked it up and handed it to him. He took it and dropped it into his pocket. "I couldn't figure you," I said. "Why it was worth your time to come up here and ride me." Then it got monotonous. All tough guys are monotonous. Like playing cards with a deck that's all aces. You've got everything and you've got nothing. You're just sitting there looking at yourself. No wonder Terry didn't come to you for help. It would be like borrowing money from a whore. He pressed delicately on his stomach with 2 fingers. "I'm sorry you said that, cheapy. You could crack wise once too often." He walked to the door and opened it. Outside, the bodyguard straightened from the opposite wall and turned. Menendez jerked his head. The bodyguard came into the office and stood there looking me over without expression. "Take a good look at him, chick," Menendez said. "Make sure you know him just in case. You and him might have business one of these days." "I already saw him, Chief," the smooth, dark, tight-lipped guy said in the tight-lipped voice they all affect. "He wouldn't bother me none." "Don't let him hit you in the guts," Menendez said with a sour grin. "His right hook ain't funny." The bodyguard just sneered at me. "He wouldn't get that close." "Well, so long, cheapy," Menendez told me and went out. "See you around," the bodyguard told me coolly. "The name's Chick Agostino. I guess you'll know me." "Like a dirty newspaper," I said. "Remind me not to step on your face." His jaw muscles bulged. Then he turned suddenly and went out after his boss. The door closed slowly on the pneumatic gadget. I listened, but I didn't hear their steps going down the hall. They walked as softly as cats. Just to make sure, I opened the door again after a minute and looked out. But the hall was quite empty. I went back to my desk and sat down and spent a little time wondering why a fairly important local racketeer like Menendez would think it worth his time to come in person to my office and warn me to keep my nose clean, just minutes after I had received a similar though differently expressed warning from Sewell Endicott. I didn't get anywhere with that, so I thought I might as well make it a perfect score. I lifted the phone and put in a call to the Terrapin Club at Las Vegas, person to person, Philip Marlowe calling Mr. Randy Starr. No soap. Mr. Starr was out of town, and would I talk to anyone else? I would not. I didn't even want to talk to Starr very badly. It was just a passing fancy. He was too far away to hit me. After that, nothing happened for 3 days. Nobody slugged me or shot at me or called me up on the phone and warned me to keep my nose clean. Nobody hired me to find the wandering daughter, the erring wife, the lost pearl necklace, or the missing will. I just sat there and looked at the wall. The Lennox case died almost as suddenly as it had been born. There was a brief inquest to which I was not summoned. It was held at an odd hour, without previous announcement and without a jury. The coroner entered his own verdict, which was that the death of Sylvia Potter Westerhamdy Giorgio Lennox had been caused with homicidal intent by her husband, Terrence William Lennox, since deceased outside the jurisdiction of the coroner's office. Presumably a confession was read into the record. Presumably it was verified enough to satisfy the coroner. The body was released for burial. It was flown north and buried in the family vault. The press was not invited. Nobody gave any interviews, least of all Mr. Harlan Potter, who never gave interviews. He was about as hard to see as the Dalai Lama. Guys with $100 million live a peculiar life, behind a screen of servants, bodyguards, secretaries, lawyers, and team executives. Presumably they eat, sleep, get their hair cut, and wear clothes. But you never know for sure. Everything you read or hear about them has been processed by a public relations gang of guys who are paid big money to create and maintain a usable personality, something simple and clean and sharp, like a sterilized needle. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be consistent with the known facts, and the known facts you could count on your fingers. Late afternoon of the third day the telephone rang and I was talking to a man who said his name was Howard Spencer, that he was a representative of a New York publishing house in California on a brief business trip, that he had a problem he would like to discuss with me and would I meet him in the bar of the Ritz Beverly Hotel at 11 a.m. the next morning. I asked him what sort of problem. Rather a delicate one, he said, but entirely ethical. If we don't agree, I shall expect to pay you for your time, naturally. Thank you, Mr. Spencer, but that won't be necessary. Did someone I know recommend me to you? Someone who knows about you, including your recent brush with the law, Mr. Marlowe. I might say that that was what interested me. My business, however, has nothing to do with that tragic affair. It's just that, well, let's discuss it over a drink, rather than over the telephone. You sure you want to mix it with a guy who has been in the cooler? He laughed. His laugh and his voice were both pleasant. He talked the way New Yorkers used to talk before they learned to talk Flatbush. From my point of view, Mr. Marlowe, that is a recommendation. Not, let me add, the fact that you were, as you put it, in the cooler, but the fact, shall I say, that you appear to be extremely reticent, even under pressure. He was a guy who talked with commas, like a heavy novel. Over the phone anyway. Okay, Mr. Spencer, I'll be there in the morning. He thanked me and hung up. I wondered who could have given me the plug. I thought it might be Sewell Endicott and called him to find out. But he had been out of town all week, and still was. It didn't matter much. Even in my business you occasionally get a satisfied customer. And I needed a job because I needed the money, or thought I did, until I got home that night and found the letter with a portrait of Madison in it.